Right, welcome to the rundown. It's going to be a pretty short episode today. I was thinking about talking about some NFL coaches who may be on the hot seat or who may be getting fired. And about every year, there are about like 5 to 8 head coaches who get fired. Some are a surprise, some aren't a surprise. I have about six on my list who may potentially get fired or who are pretty much on the hot seat. And I want to start off with Zac Taylor. Pretty big year for him. 5 of the past 6 years, they've started out 0-2, and that's an indictment on him. I mean, there must be something wrong that they're doing in training camp or in practice where they're just not able to get off to these hot starts. And as you all know who are NFL fans, every single game matters. And I know that one of the years that they went 0-2, they were able to make it to the Super Bowl or AFC Championship game. But you just can't keep relying on that. And eventually you're going to have to get off to one of these hot starts. And this year, I think it's imperative that they do get off to a hot start. I mean, they're facing the Jaguars, they're facing the Browns. I mean, they should be 2-0, but if not, they should at least be 1-1. And if they start off 0-2, they should go on a 6 to 7 game win streak. And if they can't do that and they miss the playoffs again, I think he has to go. And one of the things about Zac Taylor that NFL minds and pundits and analysts talk about is that he's not the greatest offensive mind. Pretty much his offense is dictated on just receivers beating their corners, and it's not like he's designing these elaborate schemes or plays where the receivers are able to get open. He's just relying on the talent of the receivers and the smartness of Joe Burrow to make things happen. And it's worked out to some degree. They went to the Super Bowl. They could have definitely won that game if the offensive line was any better. Made it to an AFC Championship game. They gave the Chiefs all they had the year that they won the Super Bowl against the Philadelphia Eagles. But the last few years, they've been rough. I mean, in 2023, missed the playoffs. Joe Burrow only played 10 games, but they were 5-5 in the games they played. And then in 2024, missed the playoffs, 9-8. Horrible defense, couldn't stop a cold. Joe Burrow had a fantastic season, 43 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. And honestly, if they won 3 or 4 games, they could have easily made it to the playoffs, of course, and Joe Burrow could have won an MVP, but unfortunately, that was just not in the cards for them. And one thing I have to say about Zac Taylor is that it looks like he has pretty good leadership. It looks like Joe Burrow respects him. Some of the other players on the team respect him. But at the end of the day, these 0-2 starts and just starting off cold, it'll hurt you, especially in a division where they're with the Ravens, they're with the Steelers, and the Ravens are, of course, a juggernaut with Lamar. They're going to be great again this year if they don't have so many injuries. And then the Steelers, they somehow are able to win 9 to 10 games every single year, no matter who's under center. And I think this year they're probably going to win 9 to 10 games. And with the division getting tougher and tougher, and with the Ravens being a juggernaut, you're just going to have to win every game that you possibly can. And you can't afford to give up like games against bad teams where you just lose them. You can't do that, especially at this juncture where the teams are looking pretty good. And another thing is you can't waste Joe Burrow's prime. I talked about how he had like an MVP caliber year this year, but I'm concerned about how long he's going to be able to stick around because the man just keeps taking hits. His offensive line just hasn't been any good, and I'm afraid that he's going to get Andrew Luck, where he's a talented quarterback, but for some reason the organization can't put a talented offensive line around him, and he keeps taking hit. And after taking so many hits and just being injury prone, and Joe Burrow has been pretty injury prone, he just decides to retire early. And who knows how much of a prime he's going to have. And with him being undecided on how long of a prime he's going to have, you have to have a coach who's going to be able to maximize every single year of Joe Burrow and hopefully be able to win a Super Bowl. And I think that if things don't go well this year and if for some reason they don't make the playoffs, whether it's another cold start, the defense not being able to stop a cold again, then it's not going to look good. And I think that Zac Taylor will get fired. Now, Mike Brown, the owner, is known to be a cheap owner. He kept Marvin Lewis around for 16 years, and Marvin Lewis couldn't even win a playoff game. And I'm not saying that Marvin Lewis had a stacked deck or anything, but he should have been able to at least win a playoff game. I mean, he had Carson Palmer as a quarterback. He had Chad Ochocinco as a receiver. Then they had like a few other talented pieces, but for some reason they just weren't able to do anything in Cincinnati. And I think a lot of that was on Marvin Lewis's lap. And if it doesn't work out this year, I think Zac Taylor has to go, and I think Mike Brown would definitely fire him. Now, another coach I want to talk about who's definitely on the hot seat is Mike McDaniels. I know that may be crazy to say. He's made two playoff appearances. Before that, nobody else in Miami was really able to make the playoffs. And he did bring back confidence into after Brian Flores completely destroyed his confidence and made him feel that he couldn't play quarterback. But Mike McDaniels, he brought it back. He made Tua feel that he could be a good NFL quarterback, even a great NFL quarterback. Talked about how Tua is a very accurate quarterback, and he talked about how he was going to get the best out of him and just be encouraging. And that definitely matters. And that was definitely a big part of hiring him, was trying to get the best out of Tua after the Miami Dolphins spent the fifth overall pick on him. But there's just been some concerns I've had with him as a head coach, and I'm sure that many people have had with him being a head coach. One of them is the discipline. I've talked about this ad nauseum. I hate the fact that the top level players get to show up late and nothing seems to come of it. Even them getting fined, it doesn't seem to matter, and that just shows a lack of respect. I mean, the days in New England with Belichick and Brady, I don't think players were showing up late, and players talked about how if they showed up 1 second late, Belichick would throw you out. I don't think players in Kansas City are coming in late. I don't think that's happening in Seattle, where Pete Carroll was the head coach. I don't think players were coming in late, and I don't even think with McDonald they're coming in late. I don't think that's happening in Los Angeles with Sean McVay or Buffalo or Baltimore, but it seems to be happening in Miami, and it just shows that they're not afraid of the consequences. And I think it's fine that Mike McDaniel is an uplifting, positive coach and whatnot, but at some point you got to lay down the law. And when it comes down to the nitty gritty, you have to be able to show the other players that you will not be messed with. I think Pete Carroll, who I brought up, is a perfect example of that. Uplifting, positive guy, but he's tough and he'll lay down the law when he needs to lay down the law, but it just doesn't seem that Mike McDaniel is able to do that. And I know it's going to be tough for some people to say that Mike McDaniel needs to go because he is a nice guy. He's easy in press conferences, and as someone who had to go to a couple of Jim Boeheim press conferences, it can be tough when the head coach is kind of a dick. And I'm sure he makes the beat writers and the other reporters' life so much easier when he's able to be so open and be media friendly with the media. And yeah, and he also looks like a guy who is relatable. He's not a big physical presence like a Mike Vrabel or a Dan Campbell, or he's not a scary presence like a Bill Belichick. I think a lot of media and beat writers can see themselves in Mike McDaniel because he is kind of short. He's not a big guy, and he kind of talks like a beat writer, and maybe that's why people may be hesitant on like trying to get him fired, especially when he has had some level of success in Miami. But with players showing up late, and another aspect is them not being able to win games under 40 degrees. That just shows that they're not a tough and physical football team. And the AFC, you're going to have to go to Buffalo. You're going to have to go to Baltimore. You're going to have to go to Kansas City, where it gets cold in December and January. And if you're not able to win those games just because it's cold, then you're not going to go very far. Even a couple years ago, where the Dolphins had to play Kansas City in the playoffs, they just did not look prepared whatsoever. I mean, they just looked like they did not want to be there. In Kansas City, they looked like they were ready to rock and roll. And with those two aspects, and those are two big aspects that it's going to be very hard to be a successful head coach and be successful in the playoffs if you don't have that. I mean, I'm not saying that you will be successful just because players show up on time, but I think it's impossible to be very, very successful without it. And if he can't turn it around, I think he probably gets fired. But it's going to be interesting to see if he's going to be able to change his image as, you know, this kind of soft guy, and he's going to be able to be tough and lay down the law. I mean, I'm sure for some of the players, if he all of a sudden acts like this tough guy, they're going to see right through it. I mean, it's very tough to fool an NFL locker room. They can see right through it if you're fake. And if he happens to be someone who he's not, then it's going to look pretty bad and he'll lose the locker room. And if you lose the locker room, it's over. You're just never going to be able to regain the respect of your players. It's very hard, and they're not going to follow your scheme, and you're going to get fired. So, yeah, I think this year he probably has to make the playoffs, especially with New England probably not going to be very good this year. The Jets are probably not going to be very good this year. The only team they really have to worry about probably is Buffalo. And if they're not able to make the playoffs, or again, if Tua, God forbid, has another concussion or an injury and the offense looks like it's fallen off a cliff without him, then it may be time for him to get his walking papers, excuse me, and I'm sure Stephen Ross won't hesitate in doing it. Now, the other head coach I want to talk about that may be on the hot seat, but I don't think should be on the hot seat is Brian Daboll. But if it doesn't turn out well this year, he may get fired. He's been 18 and 32 in 3 years. But to me, when you're able to have a winning record with Daniel Jones as your quarterback and win a playoff game, that's the equivalent of winning the Super Bowl. And unfortunately, that's all he's had. Now, he has gotten rid of Daniel Jones. He did draft Jackson Dart and he did acquire Russell Wilson in free agency after he did get cut by the Pittsburgh Steelers. But if it's a complete and utter disaster and they only win 3 or 4 games, then he's absolutely going to get fired. And like I talked about with Mike McDaniel, if he happens to lose the locker room, then he's definitely going to be gone. And he has to be very careful with this Russell Wilson situation. If the Russell Wilson situation isn't going well, and if it seems that the players are kind of tuning him out, he has to make a switch immediately and go with Jackson Dart. And I understand him wanting to get a veteran quarterback because he wanted to win as many games as he can, and he knows the record. He knows that as of so far, other than that 1 year, it hasn't gone well in New York. They let Saquon go, and Saquon winning a Super Bowl with Philadelphia, I think he understands that the pressure is on him, especially with the New York media. But Russell Wilson, I'm just not sure how well that situation is going to go. Sean Payton, after 1 year with him, was done with him, and you could see that Sean Payton loves Bo Nix in a way that he did not love Russell Wilson. Pittsburgh, after a year, they were willing to cut their losses with him, and he's just turned off people in his last 2 organizations, whether it was Pittsburgh or Denver or even some of the players. And I don't know. I don't think he's going to change his stripes this far into his career. And if it's the same thing over again, he has to make a change very quickly. Now, one thing that I can't understand about getting Russell Wilson, I'm not sure if they knew whether or not they were going to get Jackson Dart in the first round, but I think there is value in a quarterback just watching and sitting and learning, especially from a veteran like Russell Wilson, even though he has declined and he's not the same quarterback in terms of scrambling and just being able to be a playmaker. He's not a pocket guy. I'm sure there's some stuff he can teach Jackson Dart, and hopefully, if he's a willing veteran, be able to help Jackson Dart in understanding just how it is to be an NFL quarterback and just how to understand film, how to understand a playbook, and just what it takes to be a leader of an NFL locker room. And we've seen that it's helped quarterbacks if they've sat, whether it's Aaron Rodgers, Jordan Love, Patrick Mahomes. I mean, Patrick Mahomes talked about how that 1 year learning under Alex Smith was helpful for him and how he didn't even know who the Mike linebacker was or how to read certain defenses, and Alex Smith helped him a ton in that regard, and he's had a hand in him being the quarterback that he is today. And even Lamar Jackson sat like 8, 9 games before Flacco was stinking it up, but I think that those 8, 9 weeks absolutely helped him in just sitting and understanding what it takes to be an NFL quarterback. And I think if Jackson Dart is any good and if he's able to soak up all of that information, having Russell Wilson will definitely help in that regard. But Brian Daboll, he has to show some level of potential. I think if they win 7, 9 games, I think he probably keeps his job. And if he shows that he's getting the best out of his players, whether it's a Malik Neighbors or an Abdul Carter, who they drafted early in the first round, and some of the other young players on the team, and they show that there's a level of progress moving forward, then I think Brian Daboll probably keeps his job. But if not, he's probably going to be out of a job this year. Now, another guy I want to talk about, I talked about him briefly last time, was Shane Steichen. I talked about how the Anthony Richardson thing so far hasn't worked out. He's been injury prone. He just isn't very accurate. And when you draft a quarterback very high, it usually just doesn't work out. And another thing, Shane Steichen has to make sure that he doesn't lose the locker room. Um, I think it'll depend on who wins the starting job, whether it's Daniel Jones or Anthony Richardson, but if Anthony Richardson does win the starting job and is just not going well, I think he also, kind of like a Brian Daboll, has to not be afraid to pull the plug and go with Daniel Jones, and he has to show some level of progress this year. They have to win 7, 9 games. I mean, in his few seasons so far, they've been 17-17, or a couple seasons so far, he's been 17-17. That's a .500 record, and if he wins 3, 4 games, it's going to be over for him. And another thing, this may not be in his control, but if they do decide to fire Chris Ballard, if the season doesn't go as well as expected, then he might be a casualty of that, because when a new general manager comes in, they typically want to hire their own head coach. And if they decide to let Ballard go, they may be like, well, we may as well fire Shane Steichen and let him go and let the own general manager pick his own staff and pick a head coach that he wants to work with. And it's a good partnership that can be fruitful. So that might also be another thing going against him. But I think if he wins 7, 9 games, I think things should turn out well for him. And if somehow miraculously Anthony Richardson shows some level of improvement and shows that he can be a viable starting quarterback, then that's also another thing that's going to go with him. But he has to win 7, 9 games regardless, whether or not it's Daniel Jones or Anthony Richardson. Now another Now another coach I want to talk about is Brian Callahan. It's a weird one. I know he's only going into his second year, but the thing is that he can't afford to screw up with Cam Ward. Cam Ward is probably going to start. I can't imagine Will Levis starting over him in week 1 of this season. And I'm sure that Cam Ward is going to struggle at points. He's a rookie quarterback. That's to be expected, but he has to show some level of improvement this year and show that he can be a viable starting quarterback going forward. I mean, he doesn't have to play well from start to finish, but there has to be some level of improvement and there has to be some semblance of an offense. And that's gotten coaches fired, where they draft a quarterback high and you just botch their development, whether it was Matt Eberflus. I think that was one of the main reasons why Chicago decided to let him go, is because it just did not look good with Caleb, whether it was him taking the 68 sacks or Caleb talking about how nobody was watching film with him and Matt Eberflus. It seems like he made a mistake in hiring Shane Waldron as his offensive coordinator. Now, Brian Callahan is an offensive guy, so he has to make it work with Cam Ward, because if you're an offensive guy, the expectation is that you'll be able to get the best out of your quarterback. And Eberflus was a defensive guy, so he had to hire the offensive guy, but he just didn't make the right hire, and it just seemed that the players at the end of the day just weren't happy with his scheme or his leadership. And same thing happened with Anthony Lynn. Anthony Lynn, he was going to start Tyrod Taylor, but for some reason the medical team for the Chargers, they punched his lung right before the game and Herbert had to start. And Herbert showed that he was that guy, but it just seemed that Anthony Lynn was botching his development and he had to go. And Brian Callahan has to make sure that he doesn't botch the development of Cam Ward, and Cam Ward shows some level of improvement. And I think if they show some level of improvement and show that they can be somewhat of a decent offense, I mean, even if they won 3, 4 games, they just have to show that there's a level of fight, kind of like with Dan Campbell. Even though Detroit sucked those first couple of years with Dan Campbell, he showed that the players were willing to fight and he had a good culture going on there. And that's the same thing that Brian Callahan has to do. He has to show that, Cam Ward is improving and that they have a culture and that the players are willing to fight even though they might not be very talented. Now, this is another weird one, but Aaron Glenn. Many of you may be thinking, well, why the hell is Aaron Glenn on the hot seat? I don't think he's on the hot seat. I think he's going into his first year, but it's the New York Jets, and the New York Jets are a crazy organization, and I can absolutely see them parting ways with Aaron Glenn after 1 year. And it's not uncommon for head coaches to be fired after their first year. Urban Meyer was let go. Nathaniel Hackett was let go. Now, Nathaniel Hackett and Urban Meyer, those two were god-awful head coaches. They should not have been head coaches in the NFL. They had to go. Usually I'm against firing first-year head coaches, but they just did not look prepared whatsoever for the job. Gerard Mayo, I think that wins-wise, he did the best he could, but it just didn't seem the leadership was quite there, and he seemed in over his head in some respects. And Robert Kraft saw that Mike Vrabel was on the market, and Mike Vrabel has showed that he's a good head coach, and he also played for the Patriots, so there's that relationship, and he decided to pull the plug. Aaron Glenn, I don't think he's going to be as bad as those guys, but if they win 4 or 5 games, I can just see Woody Johnson being like, nope, we have to go because he expected Robert Saleh to work wonders with that team. And I think Robert Saleh did a pretty good job. It's not his fault that Aaron Rodgers tore his ACL and that Zach Wilson wasn't any good. Or Aaron Rodgers, when he came back from his Achilles injury, he wasn't any good. And he did pretty well with the defense. And it's not his fault that they hired Nathaniel Hackett when that's the guy that Aaron Rodgers wanted. But Woody Johnson, he fired him, and I'm afraid that he might do the same thing with Aaron Glenn, if not this year, at the very least next year. It's kind of unfortunate for Aaron Glenn. He doesn't have a franchise quarterback. He has Justin Fields. I mean, lots of people think Justin Fields has a lot of potential because he's athletic, but I just don't think he's that guy. Doesn't really have a great roster to work with. But if they don't win a lot, I can totally see Woody Johnson being like, no, you're fired. I mean, Woody Johnson, he has some of his kids making some decisions, and his kids are teenagers. And he's kind of a loose cannon, so it can definitely happen. But I think Aaron Glenn should, for the most part, be safe if he's able to have a good culture. It seems like the players are willing to fight for him, and they show some level of improvement. And I think if he does that, he should be able to keep his job. But with the New York Jets, who knows? They're a crazy organization, and they fire coaches left and right, and no one has been able to succeed there. I mean, Geno Smith wasn't able to succeed there, and he's shown that he's a pretty decent NFL quarterback. Sam Darnold wasn't able to succeed there, and he's shown that he's a pretty decent NFL quarterback. So it's going to be hard, especially with ownership and management, but hopefully Aaron Glenn can make something of it. And yeah, those are the six head coaches who I think may get fired mid-year or at the end of next year. Hopefully I'm wrong because I don't want to see anyone lose their job, and hopefully those guys can be successes. But as we know, in the NFL, it's pretty much guaranteed every year that 5 to 8 head coaches are going to lose their job. And yeah, that's about all I have for you guys today. I'll be back next week talking more NFL stuff. I think one of the segments that I'm going to do is I'm going to give my final playoff predictions on which teams are going to make the playoffs, assuming health is good. And yeah, that's it. I'll see you guys next week. Thank you so much.